Hey everybody, my name is Nathan Thomas. I'm a senior artist here at Unity Technologies, and I have a background in animation and visual effects. In my spare time, I like to make short films to explore the capabilities of real-time storytelling with Unity and its other tools. And what we're talking about today is how I used Ziva for a stylistic kind of simulation on this cartoony character. I'll share these two animations here. This one of this dinosaur dancing. And another one of this dinosaur skateboarding.
Go fast.
And I couldn't have done these short films without a lot of really talented friends who helped out. So props to my friend Amy Senden, who animated the dancing dinosaur. And I'm going to introduce you to Guy. He's one of our senior technical artists here at Unity who helped me set up the Ziva workflow for the dinosaur.
So my name is Guilherme Trevisan. I also work at Unity. I'm working as a rigger. And it was a pleasure to help Nathan with his projects and play with Big Dino.
All right, thanks so much, Geek. So the first thing we're going to do is walk through a very basic overview of what Ziva is and how we can best use it for this project.
So this is a quick video to show you the basics of Ziva. First thing you want to make sure is that the plugin is loaded. So I'm going to come here to Windows, Settings / Preferences, Plugin Manager, and just make sure that Ziva is loaded. There you go. Now you can see the menu is here. Ziva is pretty similar to nCloth. This tissue option would be, if we were to compare this to nCloth, this would be the create nCloth option, just because it makes the object dynamic. If we want to make something into a collider, we can use this bone option. This would be your create passive collider. And we have a bunch of other options to control how this tissue behaves in relation to the other objects. So let's set up a very simple scene. I'm going to come here, create a sphere, select it. I'm going to come here to Ziva and click in tissue. You can see immediately it creates a solver, much like your nucleus when using nCloth. And we still have our element here. If I click on the element, you can see it plugged a bunch of extra nodes on it. These are going to help us determine how it behaves in the simulation. You can see we already have a simulation happening. One thing that is really important is to make sure that here in your playback speed, we are using play every frame, max real time, or play every frame free. We don't want to use real time because it's going to skip some frames. So the simulation can break if you're using this option. Let's create a collider here. Let's create something to be our ground. I'm going to go here to plane. Let's make this plane a little bit bigger. Let me just fix this normals real quick. So mesh display. If I come to Ziva, I can select bone this time. And you can see now it also has this node plugged into it, the Z bone. If I were to rewind and press play, you would expect it to collide, but it's not colliding right now. This is because we still have to activate collision. We can do that here into our solver. You can see collision detection is off. I'm just going to turn it on. If I rewind and press play now, you can see our sphere collides with this, with our ground. Right now it's behaving a little bit weird because it looks like it's sliding around and doesn't really have any friction. We can easily fix that by selecting our bone element, clicking the Z bone, and you can see one of the options is contact sliding. We have this option because sometimes we have walking cycles or running cycles here, and we don't want the character to have a lot of friction. And you're going to see that immediately I start having some friction. It's not really sliding around like it was before. Now, if I were to select this sphere, you can see it creates this lattice around this grid around the sphere. This is pretty much what is deforming the sphere. If I were to select this sphere and come here, we have some nodes. The first one I want to show is this tat node. If I select it, you can see I get some options in here. I'm just going to cover the basic ones. This tat size is going to determine the resolution of our simulation. Right now it says 12. The lower I go in this number, the more it's going to subdivide it. So it's going to increase the resolution of our simulation. For example, if you pay attention to this grid, when I come in here and change it to 5, you can see it became a little more subdivided than before. So it means the deformation is going to be more accurate in some areas. The problem with that is that if we exaggerate, it's going to also take longer to simulate. As you can see, it's already taking a little bit longer to simulate every frame. Just for the sake of an example here, I'm going to keep it in a high number. Let's go with 7 or something like that. So there you go. That's your resolution. If we are ready to simulate it, definitely we can go to a much lower number. We can go like 2, and you can see it's a lot more dense now. But if I were to press play, it doesn't even move. So that's something you want to do once you are really happy with what you already got. And then you can increase the resolution, just leave it simulating. For now, let's undo that. Now, if I want to change how it behaves in the scene, I can just select my sphere, come here to Z material. The first one that would be important for us would be this Young modulus. This is how we determine how easily the material stretches or deforms. So, and you can see that we have 2 elements with the same name, Young modulus that says 12, and then Young modulus exp for exponential. This is just so you don't have to add a bunch of zeros after the number. So this one is just a modifier for the Young modulus. So let's come to the settings. I'm going to say to the power of 2. So it's pretty much reducing this value quite a lot. And you can see the element is stretching a lot more than it was before. I can even go further than that. Let's say to the power of 1 here. Rewind and press play. And you can see it's even collapsing on itself this time. So we can play with these settings if we want to make it harder, or if we want it to resist more than it's resisting right now. Another element that is quite helpful here is the mass density. If you can see I have 1060 here. If I were to reduce this, it's pretty much reducing the mass along all the points that I have in the sphere. So how much we have in density in one element can affect the other elements around it. In this case, I'm reducing it to pretty much 1/3 of what I had before. It's not as heavy as it was before, so it shouldn't really compress as much as it was compressing before. And as you can see, even though a low number for the Young modulus is not really stretching as much as it was before, it's because this element is lighter at this point. And if I go back to what we had before, now it's compressing a little bit more. You can think of it as all the points are on the top here are a little bit heavier, so they are pushing the other elements down. This is pretty helpful when we have multiple materials, because we can say, oh, this part has a little bit more mass, and it's going to affect the other areas with a lower value in their mass. So that's pretty much what I did for the examples in the dyno that we had. So how would I do that? How would I set up another material in this sphere? I could click in here and give it a name, let's say base, so just so it's a little bit more clear and I can keep track of it. If I click on the sphere, I can come here to Ziva and I can say I want another material layer. There we go. It adds another one. It would work a lot like Photoshop. So this layer is on top of the base. Let's say this is the top layer. Right now, it's just overriding everything. So I have this layer on top of the base layer. So whatever number I enter in here is going to override everything. For us to determine it should only affect certain area, I could just right-click. Just going to rewind it. Come here, select it, right-click, and let's look for paint. You can see here paint. I'm going to look for the materials. You can see I have my base material and my top material. The base, I want to make sure that it's everywhere, but let's say the top material. For the top material, I want to affect only the top part of the sphere. So let's select it. You can see it's a lot like painting skin weights. And what I want to say is, okay, I don't want any of this material, so let's flood with 0. Let's say I only want this top vertices here. I'm just going to select smooth and make it into a soft transition from one point to the other. So right now I have one material as the base and another top material affecting only the top part of it. So it's pretty much overriding the base material only on the top part of it. So if I were to come here to material top, let's say this one is going to have a little bit more mass. I'm going to increase it to 2000. Okay, it doesn't look like much changed in it. So let's increase to a higher value. What if I change it to 2500? And I'm going to reduce the other one. What if I reduce it to 300? You can see it's kind of pushing in one of the directions of it. The top part of it is influencing the rest of the material a lot more. It's pretty much as if we attach something heavier, maybe a little piece of metal there to the top of the balloon. So another thing that we can do here, as you can see, every time that I rewind and press play, it takes a little while to simulate. It's pretty much running through the simulation again every time. If you want to make sure that it's a little bit faster, I can also come here to Ziva, clicking Add to the simulation RAM cache. And it's going to add this little sim cache empty at the top. Now, if I rewind and press play, you can see it's going to start saving the data of that it finds in every frame. That's great because now I can scrub through the timeline, and I'm not simulating again. I'm just using the information that it's stored, and it's using whatever is inside of this node. If you don't need it anymore, or maybe you change too many settings and it's not really looking right, you can come here to Ziva and just say clean. And you can see it's once again empty. I can rewind, press play, and it's simulating again from the beginning. It's not really using what it saved from before. One last thing that I want to show you here is that we can use bones to control the elements in our scene. I'm going to create another sphere. Let's move it up a little bit here. I'm going to say, okay, let's say I want to use this to control the top part of our sphere, or even better, let's attach it to the bottom. This part is a little bit more flexible. Now I'm going to select it. Let's come here to Ziva, and I'm going to say this is a bone. So right now it's participating in the system. You can see that immediately it starts to collide already with our sphere. But let's say we want a little bit more than that, not only colliding, but we want it to drive a little bit of the sphere. I could come in here and say, just go into vertex mode. I'm going to select a few of the vertices. Come here, also select my tissue. Come to Ziva, and I'm going to say attach. And you can see that it created all these red lines. These are essentially a constraint between our bone element and between our sphere. Right now, if I were to go back into the first frame here and press play, you can see that it's attached to our sphere. So wherever we animate these other spheres, it's going to bring this one along. So that's essentially what we are doing with our big dino model. We have this bone element inside, and as it deforms, it controls this outer tissue. That would be the skin or the fat layers of our dino. So what I have in here is these 4 files. These files are exactly the workflow that we decided to use when creating our Ziva simulations. We came up with it because we wanted to be able to quickly simulate new animations using the same character. So if we take a look at this image, you can see here exactly how it was broken down. We start with the default or the standard animation process where we have a rig, we reference it into a file, and animate the character, much in the same way that you would animate anything in Maya. Once we were done with this animation, we export it as an Alembic cache into this simulation file, the one in the middle. This middle file is going to allow us to use this same character, simulate it really quickly without having to recreate the setup from scratch. So it's going to save us a lot of time. We can just plug our animation in there, hit play, and get it simulated in just a few minutes. Once we're done with it, we can select our simulation and export an Alembic cache out into our third and final file. This last file here is a blended version of our original animation and our simulation. This is going to allow us to bring back all the details or anything that we might have lost during the simulation process. And you can make this decision by just painting in the character. You can say, oh, I want to keep this area or remove that other area, and keep the best of both worlds. So starting with this first files here, I say files because we also have our rig, but it's assumed that it would exist in an animation, right? This would be the standard workflow. So let's start there. If I go back to my files, this would be file 0 and 1. 0 is our rig, so I'm going to quickly open here and just show you what it looks like. Nothing special happening here, just a standard rig with controls that are driving the geometry there and deforming the geometry. There's one little difference though that might not be noticeable in here, but if I go into geometry, I have a few extra geometries that are hidden. One that we are going to use today is this inner tissue. Of course, we're going to use the other ones, but the main ones in this case are going to be the inner tissue and the body. So the body is, of course, this one is important because this is our character. That's the one that we want to render at the end. But we also have this inner tissue. If I come in here and unhide it, you can see that it exists inside of the character. And this would be the rigid parts of our character. When we start simulating, we need a reference to the parts of the character that shouldn't really be moving too much. So one way that you can see it is that this would be the physical bones that exist inside of an animal, right? So if this inner tissue moves, all the other area, the skin around it, is going to follow it. Even though it's flexible, it will try to follow, but it's not going to go beyond the inner tissue. For example, if I take a look at the belly here, you can see that this inner tissue doesn't go all the way close to the belly. That's because we want the belly to be very jiggly and move a lot. So that's why we didn't include it in there. But for the arms, yes, we want the arms to move exactly like they are moving in the character. So that's why we included it very close to the skin here. So it's going to have only this much flexible. It's going to only have this little area here, this depth of flexibility. So that's how this works. It's a very simple process to create this. I pretty much used the body, shrunk it a little bit, and projected the same skin weights onto it. Now, let's move into our animation scene. I'm going to come here to File, Open Scene, and open our second one, or 01 animation, I should say. So you can see that in this file, we have our rig referenced. So it's just bringing that file that I showed you at the beginning here. And it also starts at frame -30. In this frame, we have our character set in T-pose. And then as it goes, it just goes into its initial pose. From -30 to 0, it goes into the initial pose. From there, we can press play, and then our animation plays. We do this, we create our character, we make sure that our character is in a T-pose initially, because we want to make sure that we can plug into the simulation in a way that it's compatible, that it's not going to make the geometry jump or go into another pose that it shouldn't be. So by having the simulation and the animation starting in a T-pose, both of these match, and we can use one to drive the other. So now that we have our animation in T-pose and then playing like you see in here, we are ready to export it. So I'm going to navigate here inside of our geometry group. In here, there are two elements that we want to export. Of course, the body, that's the area that we actually want to render. So cache, Alembic cache, export selection to Alembic. I'm going to create a folder here on my desktop just as an example. So Alembic output. And this time I'm exporting the body, so I'm going to say body. And you can see the animation has all the details, the blend shapes, it's closing its eyes. Everything that you would find in a standard Maya animation. Now I also want to include the inner tissue. You see, it exists inside of the body, and it's going through the same animation. So let's select it, inner tissue. I'm going to go here to cache, Alembic, export selection to Alembic, inner tissue. Now that we have these two elements exported, we can move ahead and go into our next step, the simulation. So we started here where we had our rig, we referenced the file, we created a T-pose, created our animation, and we also exported our Alembic cache. Now we are in this second element here, this second step, where we are going to use our animation, our exported Alembic cache of the animation, as a driver for our simulation. So let's go ahead and open that file, 02 simulation. So you can see that this file is already pre-configured. In this tutorial, of course, we could go through the process of creating the setup for a Ziva simulation. But what we have in here is pretty simple, and it's something that you can find online on how to create. The most important part, it would be how you connect the animation into our simulation. So we created these three elements here, one that is red, a green, and a blue. And this goes in order, pretty much R, G, and B, 1, 2, and 3. So in here, we have our animation. That's what we exported. And then we have our middleman. This would be the driver for our simulation. And finally, we have our actual simulation. This would be the output for the simulation, and our solver that describes exactly how the simulation should behave. Now, if I come in here and hide the other elements and only leave the simulation behind, when I rewind and press play, you can see that it's already simulating. You see how the body becomes flexible? So everything is already in here. If I select my simulation element, the main tissue, you can see that it has a lot of Ziva nodes connected and the description of how the tail should behave, the hips, the feet, and so on. So why is this helpful? Because we created this setup and it took a little while to create. We don't want to create it again and again every time we have a new animation. So what we did was we created the main element, and then we used the inner tissue and the geometry that we had in the T-pose to drive what happens in the simulation. Now, they don't really do anything at this point, but we can import our animation, and because they have the same topology, we are going to be able to connect, create a connection between one and the other. So let's go ahead and import our Alembic files. Here's the body, and then the inner tissue. I'm going to go ahead and rename them so we can eliminate this. We can eliminate this namespace, and I'm going to also add anim for animation at the end. So this one is inner tissue, and I'm going to say anim. Now I can grab both of these and move inside of the first group. I'm going to hide the simulation for a second. You can see right away that they don't match. The animation and the driver elements, they are not really in the same pose. But luckily, we exported it with a little bit of a pre-roll, so we can come in here and set it to -30. When we do that, you can see that our animation goes right on top of the element, as it should. Now, as I explained, they have the same topology, so I can select my animation for the body as the driver, and then we have we can select our driven, which is the middleman here. So body. Now we can create any deformers. We can use any deformers to drive them. In our case, we decided to go with a blend shape, just because we get a little bit of control of exactly where when it's active and when it's not active. So I'm going to go here into shape editor. Again, I'm going to create a blend shape connection in between these two elements. So I have the animation, and we have this middleman driving the simulation. All that I have to do now is connect the animation into this middleman. So it drives the simulation exactly like it should. Because they have the same topology, this is going to be very simple. I can just select my source of the animation and then the target of the deformation. Now I'm going to go to Windows, Animation Editors, and Shape Editor. I can come here, click in Create Blend Shape. It comes with the value of 0. I'm going to activate it so it transfers everything. And I'm going to do the same thing for the inner tissue. Animation first, target after that, create blend shape. It's set to 0, so I set it back to 1. And there we go. Let's see if it worked. I'm going to hide the animation, rewind to -30, and press play. And you can see it brought all the animation, all the nice deformations for the eyes, and everything that you would expect to see. Now, these elements, they are already connected to our simulation. So what we can do is just hide the middleman, which is the driver for the simulation, unhide the simulation. And if we were to press play now, it might break. And this is because our simulation doesn't really start till frame 0. So elements start to collapse. They start to move when the driver doesn't really exist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewind, come here to my solver, and make sure that I tell it to start exactly when the pre-roll starts. So I'm going to come here to starting frame or start frame. I'm going to enter -30. Now let's rewind and press play again. And you can see right away that the skin already looks flexible, quite flexible. We lost a lot of detail in the arms, and we also lost the eyes being closed. But that's what we are going to use our third step for. We're going to bring them back by using a blend shape to blend them together. So don't worry, it might look a little bit broken, but we are going to have all these details back. Okay, you can see it stopped. Our animation only goes to frame 74. The first time it takes a little while, but you can see we have a cache setup in the scene. I'm done with my simulation. All that I have to do now is export it as an Alembic to plug it into my last step where I can blend them together. So I'm going to select my main tissue element, come here to Cache, Alembic Cache, export selection to Alembic, and I'm going to export this one as body simulated. I'm going to go here into the settings and make sure that it starts at -30 and it ends at 74. So that's when our animation ended. Export selection. And there you go. Now we have moved into our last step. If I go back to the image, you can see here what we did. We had our animation. We transferred to the second step, which is the simulation as an Alembic. Then we connected this Alembic to our driver geometry. The driver geometry talked to the simulation and made sure that it made it move exactly like the simulation, exactly like the animation described how the movement should be. We got that output and we export it as an Alembic cache. Finally, we're going to import the animation and the simulation into this last file where we are going to blend them together. So I'm going to come here to my file, open scene, and I'm going to open my last scene called blending. So again, like the previous files, this one is already pre-configured, but it's pretty simple if you want to create it from scratch. What I have in here is a group for the incoming cache. So if I import my simulation and my animation, I would put them inside of here. The second one is our model. So this one is already connected. These two geometries are already connected to the final blend. So one is the animation connection and the other one is the simulation connection. So this is much like the other file, the middleman. This is the one that describes exactly how the final output should look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and import our Alembic simulation. Let's rename this one. I'm going to say main tissue simulated. And I'm going to move here into the first step. I'm going to also import the default, the initial animation we created. I'm going to put it inside of there, and I'm going to also name this one body animated. So if we take a look at these elements, they are going to be very similar, but one is going to be missing a few details. You can see here. This is the simulated one. It's missing a few details, but it has the secondary animation. And the other one is the animated. It doesn't have the secondary animations, but it has all the details for the eyes, and the arms look good. They don't look like they collapsed on themselves. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a similar setup from before where I connect these elements. I can start with the animated. I can say animated, this is the driver, then the driven, go into Windows, Shape Editor. We already have some connections in here, but this is just from the setup itself. So I'm going to collapse them. I already have the animated selected. Whoops, I have the wrong target here. So animated, and then create blend shape. Right now it's set to 0, so I'm going to set it back to 1. And we should already have the animation being transferred now. Now we do have an issue with the simulation. If I take a look at it, I'm going to press 4 here for you to see, we do have the inner tissue. The inner tissue came with it, which means the topology is different. I can't simply connect like I'm doing here. So if I try, for example, simulated and then sim, when I click in here, it gives me an error. It says no deformable objects selected. This means that these elements have a different topology. So for me to make them work with one another, I will have to use a different deformer. In this case, they are essentially one on top of the other. The only difference is that this inner tissue exists in our dinosaur. So what I can do is I can come in here, select and the order is going to be a little bit different in this case. I'm going to select the one that I want to deform, and then the one that is going to control it. I'm going to come here to the form,
And I'm going to use this wrap deformer. If I go into the settings, you can take a look at the settings that I'm using. What this is essentially going to do is it's going to transfer all the deformation from the simulated element into this middleman, the simulated blend shape element. I'm going to click here in Apply, make sure that they are in the T-pose as I'm creating it. Now I can hide these elements and unhide the combined. Now I'm going to press play. Let's see. And there you go. You see, I have the secondary animations and also the eyes closing, the arms, and everything in the way that I wanted. Now, how is this happening? How come I have the secondary animation just by connecting these elements? It's actually pretty simple. If I select this last element, it has two blend shapes connected into it. One is coming from the Big Dino Ziva Sim, and the other one is coming from the Big Dino Ziva Anim. And what I did to make sure that only the parts that I actually wanted to go through actually went through is by right-clicking, coming here into Paint, Blend Shape. You can paint any deformers in Maya, so that's what I did. Came in here and let's take a look at the animation. And you can see that I painted back the eyes, the eyebrows, and the arms. Exactly the areas that I was losing details. So that's the only part that is coming from the animation. Because we have the simulation happening below in the formation order, it happens first, so we see the entire simulation happening. And then I painted these areas that I'm showing you. If I come here to Paint and take a look at the blend shape masks, you can see that I painted some blend shape masks to only show the eyes, the mouth, and the arms for the big dino. And this is allowing this animation middleman to transfer the animation with all the details of the eyes blinking, the arms moving, into our final blended version. And because the simulation is happening first here, it just applies to the entire element, and then it gets overwritten by the simulation gets overwritten by the animation. So we have the best of both worlds. We have the secondary animations coming from Ziva, and we also retain our details for the eyes and for the arms. And that's it. Was a lot of fun to use Ziva to create this big dino animation. We used a very similar workflow for all our other animations. And because we have this setup created, we can automate things and make sure that they go through all these 3 files really quickly.
I'm just going to show you now how to import your Alembic into Unity. You can do anything with the Alembic. You can put it into any program, any 3D program, I should say. But for the examples that I demonstrated, I used Unity to render the Alembic on a timeline. This is just a little behind the scenes look of what my scene looks like. But you'll notice that I have a virtual camera, a bunch of keyframes, some sounds, and Alembic tracks here, all the timeline. And I'm going to walk you through how to do that real quick. But I'm going to start a new scene and do it from scratch. And just for the sake of simplicity, I'll probably use the dancing dino just because he's in one spot. I am going to just use a basic outdoor scene. I'm using HDRP. You don't have to use HDRP. All right, and so the first thing I want to do is drag our Alembic into our scene here. I just dragged it straight into the project folder. You can have your scene organized however you like. I just dropped it into this Dino folder under my assets. And in this Dino folder, I have my Alembic here, which you can see, as well as the material that I've previously set up. So let's drag our Dino into the scene. And the first thing I'm going to do is in the import settings, you can see here that it's looking for some materials. I'm just going to drag my Dino material, hit apply, and voila, we should have our Dino material set up properly. Looking good. The next thing I want to do is make a timeline. So timelines traditionally have to exist on an object, and there's tons of resources available on timelines on Unity's Learn website. I'll just go through this really quickly, but I'm going to create an empty timeline. I will call it Dino Dance Timeline. And then I have this timeline window open. It's not open by default. You need to first install the timeline package. So if you go to Window Package Manager, and then you go to Unity Registry, there's these nice kind of featured bundles here. I like to just grab the whole cinematic studio. You see here that it's already installed, but if you click on here, there will be like an install button. The one that we're specifically looking for, though, is the timeline, this package. So you can just grab that for now and pull it into your scene. The other package that we're going to need to install is the Alembic package. So you can just go to the package manager, select Alembic, and as you can see here, I've already installed it, but you would just install it here. And once it's in your scene, you want to go to Window, Sequencing, Timeline. And then that will bring up this window timeline. And you can dock it wherever you like, however you like. This is kind of, this is kind of how I like to work. So whatever works best for you. Great. So now that we have the timeline package in our scene, and we have a timeline object set up, I'm going to create the timeline asset. And you can put this wherever you like. I like to make a timeline folder. I'm going to call it Dino Dance Timeline. Great. Now we have a timeline. And we can set the frame rate. So depending on what kind of project you're making, if you're making a film, television is usually broadcast at like 29 frames per second. Games, 60 plus. Let's just do 60. I mean, why not? We're not making a movie. And you can now then drag this. One thing that I should mention is I like to lock the timeline so that if you select something else, it's like looking for the timeline on that selected object. But I'm going to lock it because I just want to keep it on this timeline. And you can drag that animation, that Alembic, onto your timeline track. And it's going to say add clip with Alembic track. I'm going to set my frame back to 0. And you can see we have the pre-roll that Guy set up for us. And I'm just going to trim that pre-roll off. So I'm going to carefully frame by frame. Oh, and to frame by frame on the timeline, you can just hit the period and comma buttons on your keyboard until we have that first frame of animation, which looks like it's around frame 60. And you can hit S on your keyboard to snip right that clip in half where the timeline marker is, delete, and then slide it back forward. Now we have a beautiful dancing dinosaur with lots of fun overlap. You may see some shadows with some artifacts on the dinosaur. I see that. It always catches my eye. You can just go into the sun and increase, the shadow map quality, which should give us a better result right away. All right, well, that's pretty much everything for this tutorial. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for joining us in our exploration and deep dive into how we set up Ziva for this stylized character. I hope you enjoy, and if you have any comments or thoughts, please let us know.